Now, on the PCR tests, which are really, really important because of what it means, because of the illusion that it represents. Now, this is something we've already been talking about. The person who created this, the idea that these things are completely inconsistent, the people who have been using them up until now are screaming about how they got false positives like crazy, right? This is where we are now, and they're using those false positives to remove your rights. So this is incredibly relevant. The article entitled, COVID-19 PCR Tests Are Scientifically Meaningless. It's pretty interesting. Now it says, though the world relies on PCR, I'm just going to call it PCR, to diagnose SARS-CoV-2 infection, the science is clear. They are not fit for this purpose. Now, it's fun to say when the science is clear, and to say that it's never clear when it comes to a conclusion they don't like. When it comes to a conclusion they don't like, we need more evidence, right? We need more research and more studies. But once they get the thing they like, well, this is sound and the science is settled. Isn't that funny how that works? Science is never settled. That's the point. But as they say, Kary Mullis himself, the inventor of the polymerase chain reaction technology, the PCR test, did not think alike in regard to how this works. His invention, this PCR, got him the Nobel Prize in chemistry. But he's the one who has continued to say that they are not for this. Now it says, Mullis passed away last year when he's 74, but there is no doubt that the biochemist regarded the PCR as inappropriate to detect a viral infection. Now, this is common knowledge, guys. So I don't really think anyone's addressed that. Maybe they have, I haven't seen it. But the fact that the creator of this test was clearly saying it was not made to do exactly what, like, think about how important that is in this factor right now, in this dynamic. The test of the PCR test is everything in regard to these cases. And the moment they started switching into this, weird, suddenly the cases started going crazy, in addition to their inflating the numbers and changing definitions and on and on and on. But if he said it was not used for this, why is that not part of the discussion? Now it says the reason is that the intended use of the PCR was and still is to apply it as a manufacturing technique, being able to replicate DNA sequences millions and billions of times, and not as a diagnostic tool to detect viruses. It's quite a big difference. Now, when it's saying detecting millions and billions, that's really the point of this. And this is what John Rappaport has talked about numerous times in regard to what this is. This is what applies more so to the viral load discussion and how you can find out how much is present in a body of some kind of substance and use that to then decide whether or not they're capable of an infection. Which, by the way, as I said the other day, is not always the case. You need, and that's what I said the other day as well, is this weird, almost willful misrepresentation of what viral load actually means. It doesn't mean how much virus comes out of your mouth from a mask. It means how much virus is present in a host. It's a basic definition you can look up. So the fact that the media is pretending like viral load is discussing how much is coming through a mask and what can get you sick or not is just, they're just using things against you to make you misunderstand what's going on. Now it says he says, the New York Times, an article called Faith in Quick Tests Leads to Epidemic That Wasn't, in regard specifically to the idea of how PCR tests can lead to false information. And it's weird how we can have precedents like this. As my browser freezes up on me. Hopefully that doesn't happen. We'll give it a second. But the article is about the idea that PCR tests have been used, there we go, in the past. This is 2007. And it's very interesting how many times we can have precedents for exactly what's happening and we pretend like we don't have enough information, right? And again, until they get the information that they like to talk about. Faith in quick tests leads to epidemic that wasn't. It says basically the opening, and it describes the situation. But the point is they had basically a little scare inside this, what was it? An institution or a medical center. Someone had a cough and it started spreading and they started testing with PCR. Everyone basically got out of control. Everyone got scared. And it says then, and basically all these people were sent home and it was this big issue and everybody was afraid and people were getting locked down. And it says then, about 8 months later, healthcare workers were dumbfounded to receive an email message from the hospital administration informing them that the whole thing was a false alarm. Not a single case of whooping cough was confirmed with the definitive test. Growing the bacterium, Bordetella, that's the Putisis, I believe. It's the name or the things in the laboratory. Instead, it appears the healthcare workers probably were afflicted with ordinary respiratory diseases like the common cold. Now, as they look back on the episode, this is in 2007, by the way, epidemiologists and infectious disease specialists say the problem was that they placed too much faith in quick and highly sensitive molecular tests that led them astray. Think about how ridiculous it is that they can realize that, they can write about it, and reflect and say, well, that was where we made a mistake, and now we're right here again, and they do the exact same thing, relying specifically on the quick and highly sensitive molecular test that is leading them astray, or maybe intentionally misrepresenting the situation. Lack of valid gold standard. And this gets into the discussion about how they decide whether this thing is what it is, and how they have not done that. And they said, moreover, it is worth mentioning that the PCR tests used to identify so-called COVID-19 patients, presumably infected by what is called SARS-CoV-2, do not have a valid gold standard to compare them with. That's a really big point to make. This is a fundamental point, they said. Tests need to be evaluated to determine their preciseness. Strictly speaking, their sensitivity and specificity by comparison with a gold standard, meaning the most accurate method available, which, by the way, doesn't exist right now for this. So we're basically taking at face value their claims that it does this. That is unprecedented as far as I can tell. Maybe not in regard to how they've lied about past epidemics, but in my experience, I've just never seen such a clear example of them just saying, this is what it is. I mean, we've seen that in foreign policy all the time, but not this in science where they're saying, this is what it is. We haven't compared it to anything. That's just our opinion, but let's make that the fact. Now it says, as an example, for a pregnancy test, the gold standard would be the pregnancy itself, right? Because you can clearly tell that they did get pregnant, and so the test was accurate. It says, but as an Australian infectious disease specialist, for example, stated in an ABC TV interview in an answer to the question, how accurate is the COVID-19 testing? So again, this is a specialist in regard to infectious diseases, asked how accurate the test is. He said, if we had a new test for picking up the bacterium, golden staph, in blood, we've already got blood cultures. That's our gold standard we've been using for decades. And we could match this new test against that. But for COVID-19, we don't have a gold standard test. Right? I mean, think about that. That is blatant and very clear. Now it says, apart from the fact that it's downright absurd to take the PCR test itself as part of a gold standard to evaluate the PCR test, there's no distinctive specific symptoms for COVID-19. Right? So how in the world are we ever able to tell whether or not it's actually what they're saying it is? We don't. It's a perfect self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, the point is what they're actually saying right now. And that's what they reference above this. The doctors right now are arguing that the PCR test itself is the self-verification. I mean, and that is just obscenely stupid. That's what they're pointing out. It doesn't make sense. And any honest scientist or even doctor will say that is absurd. But because there's a political motivation, and even maybe some people blinded by their own desire to maybe err on the side of safety, even to this extent that they just do what they think is best and sell you on that being the fact. Either way you look at it, it's not rooted in truth and evidence. Now, as they say, we have asked the science teams of the relevant papers which are referred to in regard to this discussion in the context of SARS-CoV-2 for proof whether the electron microscopic shots depicted in their in vitro experiments show purified viruses. But guess what? Guess what? Not a single team could answer that question with a yes. So where are we? How is this possible that we can be here and none of them are able to say, yes, it is a purified virus? Here's all the answers they got. From Malik, basically every one of these are all the studies that they're referencing in regard to this discussion about how they've isolated, so they claim, the virus. But it says the image in the virus budding from an infected cell. It is not purified virus. We could not estimate the degree of the purification because we do not purify and concentrate the virus cultured in cells. We did not obtain an electron micrograph showing the degree of purification. We show an image of sedimented virus particles, not purified ones. Now it says, it has to be remarked that some researchers use the term isolation in their papers, but that the procedures described therein do not represent proper isolation purification process. So that purification is what we're talking about here. consequently, in this context, the term isolation is misused. Thus, the authors of 4 of the principal early 2020 papers claiming discovery of a new coronavirus concede that they have no proof that the origin of the virus genome was viral-like particles or cellular debris, pure or impure, or particles of any kind. In other words, the existence of SARS-CoV-2 RNA is based on faith, not fact. Exactly. Now, guys, for all those that this is gospel now, even just saying something like this is they're fake news. This is disgusting. How dare you? So irresponsible. Despite the fact that we're literally these are direct responses from the very people who conducted the studies they're using to claim it was isolated, and they're straight up telling you it was not purified. Pretty damn interesting and very, very clear. Now it says, they asked Dr. Kalischer whether he knows one single paper in which SARS-CoV-2 has been isolated and finally really purified. His answer, I know of no such publication. I have kept an eye out for one. You know what that means? That it hasn't happened. And so we're running forward now on faith, on the word alone of career liars who are now using that word to capitalize monumentally on power, control, profit, stealing from you, bailing out companies, overtaking our financial system, creating surveillance networks. I mean, you go on and on and on based on things that they have never shown to you. And in fact, I would argue means that it's not what we say it is. But it says, in addition, and this is what I keep pointing out, there is no scientific proof that these RNA sequences are the causative agent of what is called COVID-19, right? And this is where we get into the idea of the virus and the disease, right? The virus being SARS-CoV-2 causing COVID-19. Another point is that they've never satisfied Koch's postulates in regard to this exact point. Now, in order to establish a causal connection, meaning that what they're finding is causing COVID-19 one way or the other, beyond virus isolation and purification, it would have been absolutely necessary to carry out an experiment that satisfies the 4 Koch postulates. But there is no such experiment, right? As Dr. Coffin pointed out, and anybody honest will tell you right now. And as Omri Duvray and Rosemary Frey recently revealed for Off Guardian. But even researchers claiming that they've done it, in reality, did not succeed. And they go through and very clearly make that case. And it's easy to tell when you understand what these things mean. And this is also, no animal died except those they killed to perform the autopsies in regard to the tests they did to prove Koch's postulates. So it says, let's not forget, these experiments should have been done before developing the test, which was not the case. But the idea is that these animals essentially had they only died when they did autopsies on them. And this is the idea that we're supposed to be testing this wildly virulent and dangerous disease. Weird how that doesn't seem to be the case. I think that was all. There's a lot in here that I hope you'll go through and read. The bottom line is, this is unverified. And now, and by the way, this is just about the idea of the test itself and how verifiable it is in regard to this topic. That's not even into the discussion of how they're being misrepresented after that, whether we're talking about even deaths or cases, right? People dying on motorcycle accidents and being deemed a COVID death. I mean, in every sense of the word, everything about this is being manipulated. But it's ridiculous when you can point something out so obvious, point to the doctors, the scientists themselves conducting the studies that openly say they haven't been isolated, and then have that be called conspiracy theory. It's just as crazy as everything else. People are very, very lost about this right now. But remember, there's a precedent. In 2007, they knew these tests would lead to false positives. They knew that it led to a complete fake epidemic. And here we are again. So it's almost like they said, hey, what was that thing that caused the fake epidemic? Let's grab that one. Interesting. But also remember that the FDA are the ones that emergency authorized these tests right when it mattered for them. Pretty interesting and revealing, wouldn't you say? And this was on July 24th. They reissued that authorization. They say today, on the 24th, the FDA reissued the LabCorp COVID-19 PCR RT-PCR test emergency use authorization. But guess what? To include 2 new indications for use. Testing for people who do not have COVID-19 symptoms, or who have no reason to suspect COVID-19 infection. Sure, let's just test everybody with this wildly inaccurate false positive giving test. So when people who don't have any symptoms or don't have any reason to be sick, and suddenly they're showing up sick and we go, oh no, the tests are exploding, seems to work in their benefit. But ask yourself why this was emergency authorized in the middle when they know in the past that they've caused exactly the kind of thing they would like to avoid. Kind of seems self-serving when you realize the agenda, don't you think?